Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about action at the Illinois State House, population decline, and more. I'll then join the Center Square executive editor Dan McCaleb to further discuss the news. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop.
Hello, I'm Garrett Hawkins, a family farmer raising corn and soybeans in Monroe County, Illinois. It might be hard to believe, but 96% of the farms in Illinois are owned and operated by family farmers just like me. Our job is to grow the healthiest, most affordable food around to feed my family and yours. Meet more farmers just like me at www.watchusgrow.org/corn.
A message from the Illinois Corn Marketing Board.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Here's some of the top stories from the past week. As population growth in the nation's largest counties rebounded in 2022, Illinois continued to see population decline. Kevin Bessler reports.
According to the U.S. Census Bureau's vintage 2022 estimates, 92 Illinois counties lost residents from July 2021 to July of last year, including Cook County, which experienced the second largest population loss in the country. Mark Glennon, founder of the nonprofit WirePoint, says high taxes are just one of the reasons for the exodus.
The economy, crime, of course, is the big one right now that is driving people out of particularly Chicago and other places.
But Governor J.B. Pritzker says people continue to move to Illinois.
We did not lose population, as you saw when the Census Bureau data came through for the 2020 census. We actually gained population.
Other Illinois counties that lost a large amount of residents include Lake County at about 3,000, St. Clair County at 2,300, and Kane County at 2,000. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Meanwhile, Democratic State Representative LaShawn Ford said he sees the decline in his Chicago community.
I think that if you look at the numbers, it's clear that we have a loss of people in the state of Illinois. I mean, even in the community that I live in, Austin, we've lost population.
Germantown Hills Republican State Senator Wynn Stoller, he said his community and family are seeing the exodus out of Illinois for other opportunities.
My own son has moved to Chattanooga. Chattanooga was the same size as my hometown of Peoria just 10 years ago. Now it's double the size because they have attracted a new Volkswagen electric car plant, and that's where my son works, in Chattanooga.
And despite the governor's insistence that Illinois is growing, census data shows otherwise. Stoller said the first step to addressing the issue is to admit there's a problem.
If we want to be attracting people to Illinois, we need to start with our tax environment, our business regulations to promote jobs, to promote economic opportunity.
Ford recognized the problem and suggested the state is already doing things he says will reverse population decline.
We're investing more money in higher ed, we're investing more money in early childhood education, and we're investing more money in businesses. I hope that this will help drive people back to Illinois and sort of stop people from leaving the state.
The U.S. Census shows Illinois at 12.6 million, down from 12.7 million the year before. Hundreds of gun owners lobbied their lawmakers Wednesday in Springfield. More than 2 months spanned a slew of lawsuits since Illinois enacted a ban on certain guns and magazines. During a rally at a convention center in Springfield, Illinois State Rifle Association Executive Director Richard Pearson said the 4 plaintiffs' groups with a consolidated case against the state's gun ban will make a difference in the federal courts.
This case that we're looking at will change not only Illinois, but every state in the union.
Pearson told the crowd the challenge is costing money, and not just private donations for legal fees. It's costing taxpayers for lawyers to defend the law.
So they use our money against us, but that doesn't mean we're going away. That doesn't mean we're going to give up. We are going to fight on no matter what.
The federal challenges against Illinois' gun ban are set to be heard in the Southern District April 12th. A state-level challenge will be heard by the Illinois Supreme Court in mid-May. And those are the top stories from the past week for Illinois. Find more online at americastalking.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, I'll join the Center Square executive editor Dan McCaleb. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.
Freedom and liberty are important to all of us in Illinois, from Rockford to Carbondale, from Quincy to Decatur. If you're looking for civil, intellectual conversations with those shaping the future of freedom, try the Future of Freedom podcast with me, Scott Bertrand. we speak with leaders across the country in the greater conservative and libertarian movements. In-depth conversations about where the next intellectual battles will happen across the country. It's the Future of Freedom podcast. Find it at americastalking.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Dan McCaleb, Executive Editor of the Center Square Newswire service. Joining me today is Greg Bishop, the Center Square's Illinois Editor and Senior Springfield Reporter. How are you, Greg?
I am good, Dan. Thanks for always having me.
Well, you're the brain trust here. It wouldn't be much of a podcast without you, Greg. We are recording this on Thursday, March 30th. The federal bribery conspiracy trial, now dubbed the ComEd 4 trial, is in its third week in Chicago. And boy, what a week it's been. Essentially, there's been one witness on the stand all week, and that is high-level former ComEd executive Fidel Marquez, who pleaded guilty back in 2021 to corruption-related charges in connection to this case. He agreed to the FBI. He made an agreement with the FBI to cooperate in the investigation, agreed to wear a wire so he could get secret recordings of some of the key people in this case, including the defendants, 4 defendants with ties to ComEd and ties to longtime former House Speaker Michael Madigan. Marquez's testimony this week, he talked about all kinds of different things that Madigan, through Mike McLean, who was one of the defendants in this trial, sought from ComEd in exchange for Madigan helping them get legislation through that was financially favorable to ComEd. What do you think?
Yeah, this is, again, almost like a preview of sorts of what we could possibly expect next year when the former House Speaker Michael Madigan goes on trial for the 22 counts that he has associated with this case. No question, Fidel Marquez being the one individual from ComEd that pleaded guilty early on after this was all revealed. That indicates that he was really willing to work with the federal prosecutors in this case from the get-go. And that cooperation was shown even more, not just from the testimony he provided in court, but Dan, we've been just sitting back looking at all of the evidence that prosecutors are releasing in this. And it started with wiretap recordings, and we heard Madigan's voice in a lot of these recordings. We heard Mike McLean's voice throughout a lot of these recordings. But now we have video evidence that's been released in this case. And the video evidence is of Marquez wearing a hidden camera, having conversations with Jay Doherty and Mike McLean. And these conversations are either in some, obscure office somewhere where Jay Doherty is talking about how Marquez should explain these large dollar amount contracts for ComEd lobbyists to explain how and what kind of work product they're showing, and even how to, not say that it's part of Madigan or a request from the speaker. And another video, it showed a dinner between Fidel Marquez and Mike McLean, where they're also talking about something very similar. And interesting to hear Marquez raise in at least just 2 videos that were released this week. And we expect to see a lot more of this type of audio and video evidence being released by prosecutors. But even in the conversation that McLean was having with Marquez in this video, it shows Marquez seeming to raise issue with the idea of these high dollar contracts, sometimes $10,000 a month for individuals associated with this, what prosecutors call Madigan enterprise. So obviously, Marquez is a very much cooperating witness, and even the defense getting up, trying to make the defense. And this week they started their cross-examination of Marquez, seeming to indicate that Marquez got scared whenever federal prosecutors came to his door. So this is really turning out to be high-stakes drama in that courtroom, and it's incredible to see the amount of evidence that federal prosecutors continue to put out.
One of the things Marquez testified to was that several known Chicago area Politico types got these contracted jobs with ComEd, including former Chicago Alderman Frank Olivo, longtime Madigan campaign operative Ray Nice, former Cook County recorder of deeds, Edward Moody. And here's a direct quote from Marquez's testimony. "I didn't expect for them to be doing any work for ComEd because I knew they were brought on as a favor to Mike Madigan." In other testimony this week, a little interesting tidbit, Mike Madigan, one of his daughters, their power went out. He got McLean to contact ComEd to rush getting that power back on. ComEd apparently hopped right to it.
It really highlights the status that Madigan had with the officials from ComEd, and I think prosecutors are definitely laying that on thick in front of the jury, who's taken all of this evidence in. I would love to be a fly on the wall whenever the jury ends up going into deliberations to see how they take all of this and how they interpret all of this, whether they just say, oh, this is business as usual, this is just typical politicking, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, or if they're going to see something a bit deeper here. And what federal prosecutors allege is that nearly decade-long scheme to have favorable legislation in exchange for little to do nothing jobs.
And deliberation still could be a few weeks away. Prosecutors and defense attorneys have said this could be a 6 to 8 week trial. We're just winding down the third week this week. You mentioned being on a fly on the wall in the jury room. I'd like to be a fly on the wall in Michael Madigan's house as this is going on. We have no idea, of course. I'm speculating here, but you got to think he's paying attention to every minutia of this trial, wouldn't you think?
I'm sure his defense is as well. His attorneys likely are watching all of this and taking in all of the evidence, and they likely are taking plenty of notes, preparing for next year.
Need to mention all four of these defendants, of course, have pleaded not guilty, claimed no wrongdoing. The former speaker himself, Madigan, has pleaded not guilty, said he did nothing wrong. We're expecting Marquez, the key witness that we talked about, to continue his testimony next week, so it could be up to 5-6 straight days of him being on the stand before the next witness is called. But very interesting story. We will be at the courthouse every single day covering it. You can read our coverage at thecentersquare.com. At the same time, this high-profile ComEd case is occurring, Greg. The Illinois legislature is also in session. That's got to keep you and your team extremely busy. Interesting story from a week ago, last Friday. Republicans essentially used a procedural move to shut down business after they realized that Democrats were trying to ram through all kinds of legislation, even though they didn't have enough Democratic lawmakers on the floor to vote. So they were having staff vote for them. Tell us about this.
We've seen this practice in the past where you have the issue of late night bill runs, where lawmakers are up against a deadline and they start lining up some legislation in order to pass it. And you, of course, have to have, the required number of votes to get it across the finish line, which is a 60 vote threshold in the Illinois House. Democrats have, I want to say like 74 Democrats. So they've got way more than the just basic majority they need. But what was fascinating is, and we've seen this practice done in the past, but how it gets revealed is rather incredible. So we've seen where in the past Democrat staff and even Republican staff would have their the staff go out and flip the switches one way or the other for a lawmaker that's not physically on the floor. Now, remember, Dan, we did have the COVID pandemic where there were some rules that allowed for remote voting, and we saw this play out where some lawmakers would vote either from their office back in their district. We even saw Republican state senator at the time, former gubernatorial candidate Darren Daley. He cast a vote from a helicopter at one point. People casting votes from cars. Yeah, pretty incredible. But this was during the height of the pandemic, where rules in both chambers were crafted to allow for remote voting. Well, they've largely gotten rid of that. So, especially in the House, there's no remote voting. That was one thing that Republicans really fought to get into the House rules for this new General Assembly. So that's no longer the option. But Friday was the deadline for the Illinois House to pass House bills out of that chamber. So they were lining up. They passed, 110 bills one day, 120 bills another day, 40 plus bills another day. Friday, after they passed probably 80 or 90 bills, It's starting to get late at night. There was a bill that came up about generic drug regulations. It got 64 votes, and then Republicans saw maybe some what they characterize as shenanigans with staff voting for Democrats instead of Democrats being there to vote. So they used a procedural move, what's called a vote verification, where they requested this verification, and when it's accepted, the speaker, whoever's controlling the House at that time, they go through and they ask for all of those who voted in the affirmative if they're in the chamber. So they went through, and after some back and forth, they granted the request for verification. They started reading off names. Is State Representative Cam Buckner, he voted in the affirmative. Is he here? No, he's not here. Remove his name from the affirmative. You get 63 votes now. Is State Representative LaShawn Ford here? Yes, he is here. Okay, well, then his name can stay as an affirmative. They then worked through about 3 or 4 different names, found that there were at least 4 Democrats that weren't in the chamber. That's knocked the vote threshold below what was needed to pass it. And then they had to pull that bill from consideration because it did not pass after that vote verification. So right after that, Republicans demanded a caucus where they then marched off the floor, and abruptly Democrats ended session last Friday. And a lot of Republicans looking at this, and even people across the state, really frustrated that this type of practice is even allowed, that you could have staff possibly, flip switches for Democrats who aren't on the House floor.
Interesting insight into the sort of the procedural way the legislature works, or tries to work anyway. You mentioned they passed hundreds of bills last week, Greg, to beat their deadline. One of those bills would make the black walnut the official state nut. Another bill would prohibit dogs from riding on a driver's lap. Republicans are saying that the bills that the Democrats are rushing through the legislature aren't what they should be focused on, that Illinois has much bigger issues to address. So they've been critical, not just of the process, but of the legislation that's making it through.
Yeah, at the Center Square, we've really covered a lot of different issues that are impacting taxpayers directly. The pension debt that the state has, upwards to $140 billion, according to the state. If you talk to some credit rating agencies, they put it at $200-300 billion. This is unfunded pension liability that just doesn't seem to be going away, regardless of more tax dollars being thrown at it. So you've got that issue. You've got the property tax issue. You've got schools that aren't performing well, if they're performing at all. You've got administrative bloat. You've got...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Greg, but I was going to say you have more than 7,000 plus units of government in Illinois, most in the country.
And it just stacks up. The problems stack up, and Republicans in the super minority, they see a lot of different legislation that's advancing from what's going to be the state nut to what's going to be the state's bean, to legislation that's going to essentially allow for undocumented residents to have easier access to driver's licenses, or getting rid of the terms boy and girl in state statute and replacing it with children, or making language in state statute gender neutral. Blaine Wilhauer, a state representative Republican from Beecher City down in downstate Illinois, he said that, and this is a Blaine Wilhauer quote, he said that what's happening at the state legislature is a, quote, woke dumpster fire. And you have that sentiment among the minority Republicans that I don't know has quite gotten across to the Democrat supermajority.
New census data came out this year, their annual census data on counties across the country. Turns out that Cook County, year over year between essentially July 2021 and July 2022, lost the second most population of any county in the United States, second only to Los Angeles County out in California. 92 of Illinois' 102 counties lost population over the same time period. Yet Governor Pritzker came out yesterday and said Illinois was growing population.
Yeah, and we had the indication that the census report was going to come out showing counties across the country and their population trends. Are they growing? Are they shrinking? Are they stagnant? We knew this document, this information was coming out, that this data set was going to be released. And all indication was it was going to show Illinois counties weren't growing by far. I asked the governor on Wednesday because he had previously said that the census got it wrong, that they undercounted Illinois by close to 2%, and even Illinois Democrats from the State House and from Congress, they wrote the U.S. Census demanding that Illinois' population be revised to 13 million instead of the 12.7 million that it is now, which was down from 12.8 million. So Illinois lost a seat in Congress in the 2020 census, meaning we no longer have the seat that we had before. So now the new Congress, we have less influence in the U.S. House. So that's an indication right there. We are losing population. Then you look at IRS data. And that shows Illinois isn't just losing population to other states. It shows that Illinois is losing its highest earners to other states. Then you get the annual census data that's released, again, showing another year of accelerated population decline. And if the governor's not interested in looking at the census data, maybe we look at U-Haul or United Van Lines. They put out annual reports that shows which states have the most people moving out of it. And Illinois regularly is among the highest rate of people moving out of the state, according to those private numbers. So I asked the governor if he still stands by the idea that Illinois is growing when all of these indicators are showing that the state is shrinking. And he stood by saying that Illinois is not shrinking, Illinois is growing, and the census, they had it wrong, they miscounted. But that's just not the case. Now, I did talk with Democrat State Representative LaShawn Ford. He acknowledges that Illinois is shrinking. And he says even in his own community in the Austin neighborhood of Chicago, he sees people leaving. And Republicans obviously have been pointing to this for close to a decade, saying Illinois has got serious problems and there's a whole host of things that need to change. While Republicans are saying the business climate needs to change, we need to lower property taxes, we need to lower corporate taxes, we need to foster a climate for businesses to want to come here to set up, thereby creating jobs, creating demand for people to live here. That's been a mantra of Republicans for years. Democrats really have ignored this mostly. I don't know if they can ignore it anymore. I think we might start seeing a little bit of a consensus that we do indeed have a problem.
Next week, Greg, municipal elections in Illinois are next week, with the big one, the highlight being the race for Chicago mayor. Of course, in the primary last month, Lori Lightfoot, the current Chicago mayor, finished in third place to two other candidates, Paul Vallas and Brandon Johnson. Both Vallas and Johnson are in the runoff and will be on the ballot in Chicago for voters to pick from. You going to be paying attention to this?
No question. I think everybody's going to be paying attention to it. And while a lot of people in downstate Illinois may say they're just done considering Chicago, Chicago's a major economic driver for the state. There's no question. Paul Vallas and Brandon Johnson, even though they both say they're Democrats, there's a clear difference. And it seems to be one of a candidate who's more of a manager approach versus a candidate who's more of a labor approach.
Yeah, Vallas being the one who's more management approach. He, of course, is the former CEO of Chicago Public Schools. Johnson, much more progressive, very close ties with the Chicago Teachers Union. So Chicago voters, you have two contrasting candidates. You've got a decision to make. Good luck with that. But Greg, that is all the time we have. Listeners can keep up with all of the stories we talked about today at thecentersquare.com. For Greg Bishop, I'm Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe. Thank you for listening.